I feel like the politician. Now, I know how people live in this country because my job, which is suing polluters, brings me to areas of this country. Like I sued, I represented 10,000 families in Spelter, West Virginia, against DuPont, and one of the biggest jury verdicts in history. But I had to go and meet the families in this, in some of the poorest state, second poorest state in America. I represent today 1,000 families in eastern Ohio, western Pennsylvania, whose lives were upended by the Norfolk Southern spill. I represented 14,000 families who, were home gardeners all over the country who, got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from Roundup. And, I have to meet the clients. I get to meet the clients. I talk to them. I see the way people are living in this country, and it's unbelievable today. It's like, when I used to visit Latin America when I was a kid and just see the huge disparities between rich and poor, which, if you're in Washington, to run for Senate in New York State, you have to raise $50 million or $100 million. You can only do that by talking to 10,000, 100 millionaires or billionaires. You don't have time to talk to other Americans. Mm-hmm. And so, you get into this bubble, which everybody in Washington is in this bubble, and they're not seeing how people are living. And I see how they live, that people are having to make choices every day. People are listening. Americans are 57% of Americans could not put their hands on $1,000 if they have an emergency. 35% of Americans are not making enough money to pay for basic human needs, transportation, so gasoline, housing, their rent, and food. They don't have it. These are people who are making choices every day that would make you suicidal if you had to make them. I was talking to Cheryl, mm-hmm. my wife, and she was talking, she grew up very poor, and she said, poverty makes you depressed. You're anxiety ridden all the time. And these people are sitting, and listening to a baby cry in the room next door and having to wonder whether that baby is $200 sick or $300 sick or $500 before they bring them to a hospital. They have to choose between gasoline in their car and food, or medicine and food. Cheryl was saying to me, he was saying, I used to watch the gas light, an engine light come on in my car, and it was like the end of the world, because I knew I didn't have the money to fix it, and I'm going to now go and have to give up eating in order to make sure that my car can get me to work. And Americans are making those choices now every day, and it's purposeful. We created a system that it was designed to strip mine the equity and the wealth of the American middle class and destroy it. And people, people love Donald Trump because he actually, I won't describe him as an honest man, but he's honest about what is happening, about how little guys are getting screwed, and they know it, and they, people like where I am representing all these people in Eastern Ohio, there's a Trump sign on every lawn, and they're there, and they don't even think, I talk to them, and they don't even think Trump is going to help them or do anything, but they know he'll break things, and they want things broken because they know the system is totally rigged to screw them. And nobody cares about them. Nobody's listening to them. And it's to me, it's heartbreaking to see, what's happening in this country.
Well, with the first time in 2016, I interviewed a Waffle House chef from Virginia, and I think his name was Nick Smith, and he said he was going to vote for Donald Trump. And he said, we all know that Donald Trump's a loudmouth Yankee. He should have had his ass kicked a long time ago. But he's at least offering us something. And that's when Hillary was offering to shut down their coal mines and give them nothing. And so I got upset at the system that made people desperate enough to vote for Donald Trump. Instead, I wasn't triggered by Donald Trump. Donald Trump's a game show host,
Yeah.
and he didn't govern any different than any other Republican in my lifetime or Democrat. He gave a tax cut for the wealthy people, and he demagogued, right?
And he gave us the COVID lockdown, which
oh boy,
which remind that was the coup de grace. That was the last nail in the coffin of the American middle class. We closed down 3.3 million businesses and taught everybody how to use Amazon so that Main Street will never open up again. And we shifted $4 trillion from the middle class to the super rich. And 500 days of lockdown, which were Trump and Biden, created 1 billionaire a day.
Yep.
500 new billionaires, and the billionaires like Bezos, who came into it with $1 billion, increased their wealth by 30%. And we wiped out entrepreneurs and business people in this country. We wiped out Main Street, and completely unnecessary. And no good came of it. It just turned our country into an oligarchy.
And the establishment and their media, they take the pain that people were feeling from the COVID lockdowns, and they want you to blame your neighbor for it.
Yeah.
Instead of blaming the people in charge. They want you to blame someone who didn't take a vaccine. Somehow they're to blame for the lockdowns, and they were never to blame. There was always a lie that the vaccines would get us out of the pandemic. It never, you could vaccinate everybody, and we're never getting rid of COVID. Yeah. Right. And so they always knew that, and they lied about it. And so we've been propagandized over and over and over. Oh, I could talk about that.
Well, WHO had pandemic protocols. CDC had pandemic protocols. The National Health Service in the UK had pandemic protocols. The EU had pandemic protocols, and they all said, you don't lock down society. And then when they actually started planning it. The neocons. This came out of the neocons. In 2002 and 2003, they started publishing these little papers saying, when there's a pandemic, we're going to lock down the whole society. And D.A. Anderson came out of retirement. And the guys who wrote that paper ended up running Operation Warp Speed. So, but D.A. Anderson, who is the most famous epidemiologist in the world, infectious disease expert, he's the guy who's credited kind of single-handedly with exterminating smallpox. So nobody questions his judgment. He was the guy in charge of eradicating smallpox. He came out of retirement when those papers started being published, and he said, you can't do that. You will kill more people with the lockdown than the disease is going to kill. And he did all these wonderful publications saying it's the worst thing it's going to make the disease spread. Disease, respiratory disease spread indoors.
Yes.
And, and you protect, you isolate the sick. This is what they did with smallpox. They isolated the sick, and a lot of people believe there's a lot. I don't take a position on one way or the other about this because I don't know. But there are books written that the smallpox vaccine had nothing to do with eradicating smallpox because it disappeared in areas where there was no vaccine. Mm-hmm. But the reason it disappeared was because of this traditional pandemic management. You isolated the sick, you got them away from people. And that's how they kill, and then you protect vulnerable, the elderly, et cetera. And that's how they eradicated it. So, again, I'm not taking a position on that. I do not know. I don't know enough about it. I haven't studied it. But that, but that's what D.A. Henderson did. He did the vaccine and he did the lockdowns. But that's what people say. A lot of the scholars say. So, but
did it demoralize you like it did me to see every Democrat, including Bernie Sanders, vote for the CARES Act, which was the largest upward transfer of wealth in human history, and they pretended they were doing it to somehow help workers, which was a lie, and they all lied about it.
Yeah, I mean, it was dismaying, but What I was curious about was the sort of the mechanisms that, because I don't believe Bernie Sanders did that maliciously or malevolently. I think he was
not only did it, that he lied about it. Not only did he do it on purpose, he lied. He lied when he said that he got the unemployment. He didn't get that unemployment put in there. That was, I'm thinking, another senator got it put in. I can't think of his name right now. And then Bernie tried to take credit for it. So he's not what he pretends to be. And right now, he already endorsed Joe Biden a year and a half out. That's the most unprogressive thing you could do, undemocratic thing you could do. He's a willful tool of the military-industrial complex and Wall Street on purpose. He's voted for all these wars. He's a war pig. That's the worst thing you could be as a progressive, is a war pig.
Yeah, that's the truth.
And so, I don't know him personally. Maybe you do, so maybe you have warmer feelings towards him. But I don't. I feel like a big betrayal to the progressive movement. He took all the. I mean, we figured out that the Democratic Party was taken over by corporations, and there wasn't a difference between the parties that was worth anything. And that's what he. And then all of a sudden, all that got thrown out the window, and all that progressive revolution. He used to start every speech. Sounds like you're ready for a revolution. He doesn't say that anymore. He hasn't said that for 5 years. And he took all that revolutionary energy and he funneled it right back into a pro-Wall Street, pro-war, anti-worker party. And that, to me, is the unbelievable betrayal without even a discussion. Like, he won't even let a debate happen in a primary before he endorses the warmonger-in-chief. Anyway, so how would you? So you talk about you go around the country and, just much like your father did when he traveled to the South and he saw the poverty that he didn't know existed in the country, and that really changed him. And so you've seen that and I travel around the country too. So I see what's going on. You see what's going on. What is your plan to help middle-class people and poor people get their head above water so they're not treading water all the time and they can afford a $400 emergency and they don't have to live paycheck to paycheck? What is your plan?
I mean, the biggest attacks on the middle class are coming from military expenditures. We were supposed to get a peace dividend, and we, in 1992, when the Soviet Union, shut down.
I know.
And we were supposed to get a reduction from $600 billion to $200 billion. And instead, today, the total military expenditure, if you include national security, is $1.3 trillion. And the reason we need the national security is because the military is abroad, getting everybody pissed off at us. Mm-hmm. Right? So, and that's why my grandfather and, all of the framers of the Constitution, John Quincy Adams, everybody else, John Quincy Adams said, America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. Because when we turn America into an imperium abroad, we are going to turn it into a national security state at home. The two things are conjoined. And everybody knows that. You can't have an imperium abroad. You can't have an imperial nation abroad and still continue to have a democracy. You're going to turn it into a garrison state, a security state, a surveillance state. And that's what we've got today. And all of it is connected, and it's costing us $1.3 trillion, and it's enriching the military contractor. Mitch McConnell, when he was asked recently about the Ukraine war, he said, don't worry, it's $113 billion. It's $113 billion. He said, that money, none of that is staying in the Ukraine. It's all coming back to U.S. military contractors. Well, he admitted it's just a money laundering operation, the whole thing, and he said that it's enriching our country, but he meant it's enriching these
military-industrial complex.
Yeah, the military-industrial complex. And by the way, the same month that we topped off our commitment, which was in March, we topped off our commitment to this March of $113 billion to Ukraine. And that same month, I have a buddy who's a commercial fisherman and a lifetime, long-term buddy of mine. I represented commercial fishermen for all of my career, in lawsuits. That's how I started environmental law, representing commercial fishermen on the Hudson. And this guy is a commercial fisherman from, he fished out of Wellfleet, he fished out of Chatham, and also a couple of ports in Long Island. But his whole life is that. And that business is, privately owned business. His son-in-law now owns the oyster business, but he has no pension. He has no equity. He has no salary, and he is disabled permanently. He cannot work. So he's on disability, and he was getting food stamps, $283 a month in food stamps. Now, meanwhile, the price of food over the past 2 years, has gone up now 36%, but actually for basic foodstuffs like chicken, dairy, and eggs, 76% in the last 2 years. And so he's watched the value of that $283 shrink. $283, that's about $9 a day to feed yourself. All you're going to get is bad food for that. So we're feeding the poor bad food that's making them sicker. On March 1st, the same month that we topped off Ukraine at $113 billion, he got a phone call, a robocall from the government telling him that his food stamps were cut by 90% to $23 a month. 30 million Americans got that call. You know how much that saved us? $113 billion. The same amount we're sending to Ukraine. And that same month, 15 million Americans were cut off the Medicare rolls. And that same month, the government, the Fed, printed $300 billion unanticipated to pay off the investors in the Silicon Valley Bank. So there's a lot of money for military contractors, and there's plenty of money, for the banksters. But if you're poor in this country, we can't feed you. You cannot feed yourself. And, so the first thing we need to do is we need to cut the military. We got 800 bases abroad. We need to cut those expenditures back from the raw military expenditure, $900 billion. We need to cut that to $500 billion. And we need to do that right away. And then we need to cut our healthcare costs. Now, all of the Democrats and Republicans are arguing about Obamacare, different ways to pay healthcare, different way, who pays. None of it reduces the cost. It's just who's paying for it and how do you pay for it? Is it, individual Americans who get stuck with the bill? Is it the hospital systems? Is it the insurance industry? Who is it? And it's like moving deck chairs around on the Titanic. The ship is still going down and you're just figuring out, who's going to get saved and who's not. But the real question is, why are we spending so much? We spend $4.3 trillion. We spend 20 times as much in real dollars on healthcare than we did when my uncle was president. 20 times. Why is that? Here's why. Chronic disease. We, in 1960, well, let me say this. 80% of healthcare costs are now going to chronic disease. So 80% of that $4.3 trillion. In 1960, 6% had chronic disease. In 1986, 11.8%, so 12%. It doubled. By 2006, 54%. They won't tell us what it is now because they don't want to tell us.
Really?
Yeah, they won't do that study again. But there was a study that came out this week.
So we're getting sicker and sicker.
We're getting sicker, and we are the sickest country in the world. We have the highest chronic disease rate of any burden of any country in the world. That's one of the reasons we had all these deaths from COVID. We only have 4% of the population. We had 16% of the COVID deaths. How's that a success story? Number one, how's Tony Fauci, getting all the laurels and ribbons pinned and the medals pinned on him? Number two, he had the worst death rate of any country in the world by far. And part of that was mismanagement, not giving people, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine. But the other part of it was chronic disease. These people weren't dying of COVID. That was pushing them off the cliff.
Come see our live shows. We're going to be in Chicago, Rosemont, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, New York City, Pottstown, Pennsylvania, Stamford, Toronto, Toledo, Detroit, St. Louis, and more. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for those tickets.
Private school tuition for Clarence Thomas's grandnephew.
Amid controversy,
Activists paid Ginny Thomas thousands of dollars.
their histories,
Ginny Thomas grew up with Republican activism.
their influence.
The idea that I won't be told what to think just because of the color of my skin animated Clarence Thomas.
Overturning Roe versus Wade.
Now, Clarence and Ginny Thomas, politics, power, and the Supreme Court.
Some people might call it payback, others might call it the fulfillment of his dreams.